LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Now listen. Hi, I'm Tony, and I am a thespian. There, I said it. I own it. Yay for me. Thespian. 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 Any way you pronounce it, it's what I am. Truth is, I always knew I was. Well, wait, that's not exactly true. I mean, I had inklings as a child. But I grew up in Iowa in the 60s and 70s. Thespianism wasn't exactly encouraged. I think the underlying attitude was, love the play, hate the player. Besides, I was a kid. What did I know? I know I adored the movie Mary Poppins. And when I told my parents I wanted an umbrella for my birthday, I was told in no uncertain terms, no. All you had to do was say no to my Grandma May, a nice, headstrong Irish lass, and she got me a fantastic umbrella as a gift. It was made out of a somewhat masculine burgundy madras fabric. Well, as masculine as an umbrella being held while dancing to Jolly Holiday and standing with my feet turned out like Julie Andrews could be. But oh my God, I just loved it. I was so happy. Now, the dictionary definition of thespian is relating to drama or theater. I suppose another tip-off was my flair for the dramatic. One spring morning before grade school, the skies outside our split foyer tract house had the eerily green tint that comes before a tornado. My family was gathered in the kitchen eating breakfast, Mom feeding my baby brother, my sister gorging herself on Captain Crunch, and my father and me looking out the window at our backyard, my Crunchberry high just kicking in. Our neighborhood had been a cornfield only 4 years before, and few neighbors had garages. At that time, we had one of those awful tin sheds from Montgomery Ward that, from a distance, looked like a lovely little white house with a pitched roof, but up close it looked like something you might find a kidnap victim tied up in. Suddenly, the air pressure dropped outside, causing the wind to whistle loudly through the winter storm windows that were still in place. My father hollered, "Get to the basement!" And I watched our little hideous shed get picked up and rolled until all sides burst apart, spewing bicycles, bags of potting soil, and my brother's big wheel. We rushed to the basement and assembled in the southwest corner like all well-trained Midwest families did. My mother was holding my brother, and Dad, in his best Charlton Heston hero voice, informed us that he was going outside to pick up what was left of our shed. The wind was still howling outside, and my mother protested, but he went anyway. My mom must have seemed upset, because being the dutiful, dramatic son, I picked up the ball and ran with it. In retrospect, I probably could have blamed the Crunchberries, but in truth, that would not have been accurate. My eyes welled up with tears, my little brow furrowed, and I began a monologue worthy of an Irwin Allen disaster movie. "Oh my God, this is terrible, Mom. What are we going to do? What's going to happen to us? Oh my God, oh my God." In my head, Maureen McGovern was singing "There's Got to Be a Morning After." Finally, my mother had just had enough. "Oh, Tony, for God's sake, just shut up." She lit a cigarette and stared up at the basement windows. We built a garage shortly thereafter. At the ripe old age of 7, I had my first experience that pulled me happily out of the stage door closet. It is a date I still celebrate today, October 26th, 1970 to be exact. My favorite Uncle Tom had been drafted and was about to go off to Vietnam, and the last play he did at the Sioux City Community Theater was a 1960s comedy called The Impossible Years. My parents took me to it, even though the concept of teenage pregnancy and a scandalous book called Fanny Hill were way over my head. But it was a magical evening, and I was transfixed. I still remember the backstage smell, the surprise pink hue of the lights, and the actors taking off their makeup with vats of greasy Albolene cream and toilet paper. I was forever changed that night and was a thespian from that point on. Growing up in suburban Des Moines was not particularly conducive for thespians in the 1970s. I mean, most other kids played football and baseball and didn't have theater companies in their garage. When it came time for college, I couldn't wait to get out of Iowa. It wasn't that I particularly hated it, but I had put in my time and had had enough. And I suspected there was a great big world out there full of people like me, and I needed to go see it. Hollywood was where I wanted to go to college. It freaked out my mom, not only because it was so far away, but it was expensive. She and her sister put their heads together and with some smart maneuvering and salesmanship presented the University of Minnesota as a viable alternative. Minneapolis was certainly a bigger city than Des Moines, cheaper than Hollywood, and a lot closer to home. Besides, Mary Tyler Moore had moved to Minneapolis in her show that I watched like clockwork every Saturday night. The visit to Minneapolis my aunt arranged was not unlike those free weekends at timeshares that come with a lot of fabulous activities, free food, and end with a heavy sales pitch. Auntie C hooked me up with tours of the Guthrie Theater, the world-famous Children's Theater, and the gorgeous spread-out University of Minnesota campus. I walked down Nicollet Mall, the main drag of a real big city, and in my head I heard the Mary Tyler Moore theme song from the first season. How will you make it on your own? This world is awfully big. This time you're all alone. Turned out no heavy sales pitch was needed because I knew this was where I had to be. Freshman year at the University of Minnesota was like dying and going to heaven. Minneapolis in 1981 was a happening place. Janet Jackson was there recording her breakthrough album Control. Prince was still an up-and-coming commodity and would perform impromptu concerts at First Avenue. The town was hopping, full of theater, and truly a place thespians could be themselves. My theater major immersed me in all kinds of interesting classes like acting, voice, singing, and I spent my first year performing in productions like Henry V and Once Upon a Mattress. I had no idea there were so many thespians just like me. Like I said, it was heaven. The first summer after freshman year presented an odd predicament. There was no reason for me to stay in Minneapolis, so that meant returning to Des Moines. The University of Minnesota was still on some archaic quarter system based on the farmers' harvest schedules. School began late in the fall and lasted well into June. That meant that all the summer jobs in Iowa were gone by the time I went back. My friend Tony had secured a job at Adventureland Amusement Park doing a sappy, patriotic musical review in which they danced around in red, white, and blue vests and lip-synced "We're Proud to be Iowans, Yes Indeedy" 5 times a day. Oh, I was so jealous. The only summer job I could get was one my mother hooked me up with at Drake University, where she was working full-time to help finish up her own schooling that had been cut short when she became pregnant with yours truly. My job was in dorm services. I reported to work at 7:30 in the morning, which just as well could have been 3 a.m. as far as I was concerned, to this dark, dungeon-like basement and worked with a group of people who, between them, maybe had one full mouth of teeth. Now, most of the men were World War II vets, and this is where I learned the very valuable lesson that tattoos do not look good on aging skin. Kids, they really don't. It was a depressing, miserable job, and though I wasn't harassed by these people, I think they had an inkling of my thespian tendencies, and I certainly had nothing in common with them. They just sit and complain about their lives and the weather and what they'd had for dinner the night before. Then they'd give me all the worst projects, like moving 60 mattresses from the first floor to the 4th floor with no elevator. I learned how to accelerate the amount of work I did in the morning when it was cool and then find an empty dorm room during the hot and humid summer afternoons to take a nap. All the while they stayed in the cool basement whining. In addition to experiencing the misery of manual labor, that summer my father seemed hell-bent on convincing me that a theater degree was not a viable long-term option. I needed to major in something I could fall back on. Between the job with the toothless laborers and constant badgering by my father, I succumbed to the propaganda. I convinced myself that continuing my thespian track would lead me to a life stuck in dorm services, staring at pinups of bikini-clad girls on Harley-Davidsons and drinking Bud Light. Back at the university that fall, life went on, only now I was a speech communications major. What exactly is that? Oh, you can do so many things with it, I told people. Journalism, psychology, it's really all-encompassing. I didn't have a clue. My new major required one dreary class after another. In one of them, we spent 10 weeks studying the fascinating dance of the bees. Another class was spent labeling and studying the process analysis of small group interaction. I found this whole thing tedious and ridiculous, and I leveled with my professor. This is simply called working a room, and it is something that my mother and uncle have raised to an art form. My very serious professor, with her Ogilvy home perm and huge 80s glasses, stared at me, unimpressed. Needless to say, she flunked me. A year later, and 20 pounds heavier, I had spent the greater part of the year having been on and off academic probation. At more than one meeting with a guidance counselor to get to the heart of my failing academic career, I had resorted to fake tears and blaming my parents' crumbling marriage. I know, it was bad of me, but you know, the guidance counselors usually bought it, and honestly, it was a little bit of a dramatic release for me, and it felt kind of good. This would usually get me off the hook until the next absurd speech communication class, but at long last, I finally got suspended. That also happened to coincide with my parents' divorce and the unfortunate ending of their financial support. I now had to buckle down and work 4 jobs simultaneously to pay my way. One of my many jobs included working at Haagen-Dazs. Not a bad job, since most nights were spent exchanging malts for cocktails at the bar next door and inhaling nitrous oxide from the whipped cream cans in the back room. Nice work if you could get it. A friend of mine encouraged me to audition for the local comedy theater where she was working. It was a production of a new original musical called Night of the Living Bread. Feeling lost, fat, and certain I had lost my thespian mojo, I reluctantly auditioned for the show. And amazingly, I booked it. From the first reading through the many-month run of the show, I played a variety of characters, from weatherman Tad Withers to the killer bread itself. My inner thespian once again burst forth from its closet, blowing off a door that would never again close. It was paradise, and I was really, really happy again. I finally realized my father's control had ended when the money train pulled out of the station, and my destiny was in my hands and not my parents'. They had their own problems to deal with. I changed my major back to theater, that crazy major that when employers see it on a resume, they must roll their eyes. Oh, one of those. At least we'll be entertained in the office. In paying my way through the rest of my schooling, I got my union card and worked professionally in the thriving Twin Cities showbiz market. I learned computers on the work-study program at the U, a skill that has proven to be a very profitable backup throughout the years. Who knew? But the best thing I got from my time at the U was that I cannot deny that I am an out and proud thespian. It's part of who I am. It brings me intense joy. It connects me with something inside to something beyond. And when I suppress it and pretend that I'm not wired that way, it only makes me miserable. We tend to take ourselves with us wherever we go. In other words, you can run, but you can't hide. My last Minnesota summer was spent doing a blissful 2 months of summer stock theater in Mankato, Minnesota, a sleepy river town with more secrets than Stepford. Before heading to Hollywood, I made one last trip down Nicollet Mall. Ironically, my last time on the street with a full head of hair. Love is all around, no need to waste it. You're gonna make it after all. I yanked off my hat and tossed it in the air. You're gonna make it after all. Ba-da-ba-ba-bum, da-da-da-dum. LOL take 2. LOL take 2. LOL take 2. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-bum.